Hi, Mick McQuaid here to talk about the grammar of graphics. This is a 2005 book by Leland Wilkinson, and it is based in part on Beltin's theory. And we're just going to touch briefly on chapter 2 of this book, but before we move on to another book that's also based in part on Beltin's theory. But Wilkinson was the first to write about a software implementation of Beltin's theory, so I think it's worthwhile that we at least touch on this. Now, the chapter is titled How to Make a Pie, and it illustrates two different ways to make a pie chart. Wilkinson begins, by the way, by noting that pie charts are ubiquitous and that they're loved by managers and hated by statisticians, both without justification. They're just a way to visualize data. One approach to making a pie is simple. Start with the information, do the process of making the pie chart, and render the result. If we follow this process, the emphasis is on the result, and this is common, but according to Wilkinson, it's inadequate graphical practice. Many programs have ways to select pie chart, then fill in the information, then see the pie. And Wilkinson suggests that this is wrong. We should choose the pie much later in the process. So he presents an alternative view, which I'm going to show you in a second. But first, let me just point out that this is a formal diagram. So this is a data flow diagram, and the word source is enclosed in a pair of parallel lines that indicates that it is a data source. The arrows are data flows, and the labels tell what kind of data is flowing. The oval indicates a process, and the label obviously indicates what the process is. And the rectangle indicates an external entity, and in this case the external entity is whatever it is that's used to render the pie chart. Now here's a slightly more elaborate process, and this is what Wilkinson suggests, or the approach I should say that Wilkinson suggests, which takes quite a few steps before choosing the particular pie shape. So let's review those steps. So first we have a data source, and from that we take variables, and we convert the variables into what Wilkinson calls a variable set, or a var set. And we perform algebra on that, then we perform scales on that. So each of the ovals is a process. Perform statistics on that, perform geometry on that. Now we're in the realm of the graph. We identify the coordinates, and we add the aesthetics, which in Beltin's theory also are called aesthetics, or the retinal variables, the visual variables. And finally, we ship it out to a renderer. Now here's the data for our pie. And the main conclusion that we can draw from this data is that more females than males believe that there is bias favoring males in peer review. It takes a while to arrive at this conclusion because there's a lot to read. It might be nice to have a quick way to see this, and that's what a pie chart would offer us. So I'll just take a moment here to read through the data. It's a survey of US scholars. There were 5,000 people surveyed. 3,800 responded. Response rate was 71%, which is an amazing response rate. You never see that in real life. 70%, 74% males, 26% female respondents. Do you think scholarly journals are biased? And the answers are rarely, infrequently, occasionally, frequently, or not sure. And it's difficult to very quickly figure out. You know, you can sort of match up the words rarely and see that males say 30 and females 8. So it's obvious that males are more likely to believe that bias occurs rarely. And then if we move on, let's see, infrequently, still males are more. Occasionally, now males are less. Frequently, now males are much less, and not sure, or similar numbers. Okay, so anyway, we're going to take on the first process to extract the data that we need from the data as a whole. And this is the process that's labeled variables in the data flow diagram, and it takes us from the data to a variable set or a var set. Now the var set is two separate tables, so the next process, which is called algebra, consists of cross-tabulating or joining the two subtables together, giving a more manageable variable set. The next process is called scales and converts the variable set into integers. So previously the variable set was not easily computable. We need to convert it into factors or levels, whatever you want to call it. And this is something that software usually does for you, but it's still an important step, and you must understand how software does it. For example, I have often seen people inadvertently come away from a software package with a counterintuitive scaling where 5 means none and 1 means frequently. And that causes people to struggle with the interpretation of the data. Okay, so the next step is statistics, and here we see the computation of the summary proportions or percentages. The next step is to construct geometry, and now we see a graphical element for the first time. It does not take on yet the characteristic pie shape. It is simply an area proportional to the statistics. Next, we convert Cartesian coordinates into polar coordinates, and that turns the rectangles into the pie slices that have a radius and an angle. Next, we compute aesthetics, which are the things we can see. Now the pie slices take on their positions, colors, and labels. And finally, we're ready to ship the result to the renderer. Here's an example of how we might do that, a list of instructions to the renderer that result from our processes. So this would be an example of how a software package could interpret what we've done. And you can see that we can see at a glance the difference in the perceptions of males and females of the answer to this question. Okay, so that's the end of our brief look at how to make a pie and of our look at Wilkinson. So Wilkinson develops a theory about this process throughout his book, and it's similar to the theory that we're going to look at in detail. In fact, we're going to spend the rest of the semester working with a detailed version of an alternative theory that has gained a lot of popularity. Wilkinson's book, I think, was influential on this other book that we're going to delve into, but it didn't result in widespread practice. So I just wanted you to be aware of it, and it is a worthwhile read. So thank you very much for your attention, and until next time.